I'm Ken Record, and I welcome you back to Mining Biblical Truth. As this week we delve into the First Samuel chapters 25 through 27. I'll have a few brief comments this week, and then we're going to have a mystery guest, so don't go away. These chapters I'm calling deja vu, because it just seems like the same things keep happening over and over again. First, let's look at the Old Testament parallels to this passage. One unique aspect of Old Testament typology is that the same person can echo in his or her actions those of multiple past biblical figures. The relationship between Isaac and Jacob and Saul and David is one of those. In both cases, the father refuses to accept God's chosen one. In Saul's case, David being like an adopted son. And then we have the Laban, Jacob, Nabal, David comparison. Laban and Nabal, whose names are reversed, even not just in English, but in Hebrew, are both narcissistic, greedy fathers-in-law who mistreat their pseudo-son, or in Laban's case, son-in-law. Actually, that was, And Laban and Saul prospered due to presence of Jacob and David as shepherds and shepherd protectors. Samuel is like a father to both Saul and David. And when Samuel dies, Saul seeks David's death, like Esau sought Jacob's death. And David becomes like Esau. Both are men, quote, of the field, both described as ruddy. Both seek to kill with the help of 400 men. I don't think that's a coincidence. Abigail takes on the role of Jacob by sending gifts ahead of her to David, as Jacob did to Esau. One psychological insight is the concept of transference. Both Saul and Laban mistreat and insult David. But David can restrain himself from taking vengeance on an elevated person like Saul, but that pent-up anger can be transferred to someone perceived as less significant or subordinate, like Nabal. It's similar to a husband who's chewed out by his boss at work and takes out his anger on his children at home, or an older brother who's disciplined by his father and then takes out his vengeance on his brother. And then we have the wisdom foolishness contrast in Hebrew. The similar words sakal and solkal, words with one letter differences in Hebrew. Sakal means to act foolishly, particularly to act foolish in an ethical way, lacking in ethics. And Salkal means to act wisely. The Sakal person is wise in his own eyes. As in the chaotic time of the judges, every man did what was right in his own eyes. A Salkal person is wise in God's eyes. God uses Abigail to redirect David into doing what is right in God's eyes, not his own. We looked at this chiastic structure of chapters 21 to 31 last week, but I just wanted to point out that around the center of the story of David and Abigail, we talked about this in a different context last week of the Ziphites betrayed David and David spares Saul's life. And then a kind of deja vu episode occurs again in a different scenario. But in both cases, David acts wisely via the Spirit. But then in the middle, David has to humbly accept wise counsel from an unexpected source, brought by the Lord, though. And then I think it's important to point out that we start to become acquainted with some of David's mighty men who will be very instrumental in the entire life of David as king. And these are the sons of Zeruiah, David's sister. And this week we meet Abishai, who desires to kill Saul. His brother Asahel will later be killed by Abner, and then his brother will take revenge and kill Abner and Absalom, Joab becoming the commander of David's army. I like to call these the cousins of thunder, after the sons of thunder reference to John and James, sons of Zebedee in the New Testament. These guys are always willing to kill. David never deals effectively with Joab, and at the end of his life, he tells Solomon to kill Joab. So was David doing God's will by going to Philistia in chapter 27 to avoid Saul? Well, let's look at the evidence. There's no mention of consulting the Lord by prayer or by his priest or by human and Thummim. While running from Saul in Israel, David writes 11 Psalms. But from running from Saul to Philistia, while he's there, he writes no Psalms. To me, that indicates a lack of influence of the Spirit. The king of Gath becomes an ally of David later, which could indicate that this might have been God's will. There are prophecies against the Philistine city-states in Amos 1:6-8, Zechariah 9:2, and 2 Samuel 6:10, none of which include Gath, which is one of the major cities. And the narrator does not criticize David's action, nor does any prophet come forth to criticize him. David does seem to contribute to the conquest of the land that had been left unfinished in the days of Joshua. So I think this whole venture into Philistia is very much a confusing mixed bag in terms of whether it was God's will or not. So can it be a righteous act if it implies that David does not trust God to protect him from Saul? David manages on his own through cunning and subterfuge, but in the end, tragedy strikes, and then David turns to the Lord. This will be in the subsequent chapters we study. An unknown source said, man is the only animal that runs faster when he has lost his way. I love that. But in his mercy, God forgives and restores. Only after receiving mercy and restoration can David return to the promised land, and the same is true for us. So now I am really excited to introduce you to our mystery guest speaker. I need you now to imagine that you are one of the elders of Bethlehem, sitting around a fire on a cold, moonless night near the city gate. Your discussion turns to David and the other outcasts, many of them from your town, who have been on the run now for 4 years. News from them has been scarce. Suddenly, a shadowy figure, whose face is hidden under a hood, steps out of the darkness into the light. Our guest in a moment. Shalom, greetings to you, peace to you. Have I changed so much that you do not recognize me? I am Abishai, son of David's sister Zeruiah, and brother to Joab. I have just come from the wilderness in the land of the south. I can't stay long, but I want to tell you what has been going on with us, the outcasts, David's mighty men. I know that the Lord will punish evil, but it is hard to suffer while waiting for the Lord to act. When David fled from King Saul, I joined with him to flee the evil of Saul's reign. I have been running, hating, and fighting with David now for 4 years. I am tired of running, tired of living in caves, hounded by Saul. When we heard of the death of Samuel, David was devastated because Samuel anointed David. Could David claim the kingship without Samuel to back him up? We had been living in the desert area at the southern boundary of Judah. There were many shepherds with flocks in the area who worked for a rich man named Nabal. Since we were there anyway, David positioned us to protect the flocks from the Amalekites and other enemies. Understandably, David has enormous concern for shepherds. When the sheep were taken north for shearing, David sent some of his young men who had guarded the sheep, men who Nabal's workers would recognize. They were courteous and wished Nabal health and long life. They reported that they had protected his sheep and shepherds as directed by David, and they respectfully asked for a gift of food to share of the proceeds. They did not ask for a specific amount, allowing room for Nabal to show his generosity. They were shocked by Nabal's response. He asked, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse?" Oy vey, everyone knows who David is. Is Nabal not a man of Judah? He then compares David to a runaway slave. How insulting. It is no wonder that Nabal's name means ethically foolish. We call this kind of person Kase and Ra, hard and evil. All he could think about was himself. When they returned and told David, he went Meshuggah. He immediately told us to strap on our swords, 400 men no less. I was surprised that he did not pray about it or ask our priests to consult the Lord or consult the human instrument as he had in the past. On our way to Nabal, we were shocked to be blocked in the road by Nabal's wife, one Abigail, whose name means my father is joy. I thought to myself, what is this woman doing out here by herself? Who does she think she is? Women do not go out alone or take action independent from their husbands. Then she fell at David's feet. She took the blame for Nabal, even though she did not hear the visit by David's men until after they had gone. She gave an impassioned speech. I've never heard anything from a woman like it. She wisely pointed out that David had previously allowed the Lord to take revenge against his enemies. She brought generous gifts of food for us. She praised how David fought for the Lord, even mentioning a sling, obviously referring to Goliath. She even prophesied that David would become king. I have never heard a woman speak with such wisdom and courage. David immediately saw that the Lord had sent Abigail to stop him from sinning. So he repented, accepted her gift, and turned back. David shared with us this line from a psalm he wrote on the occasion. Keep your servant also from willful sins. May they not rule over me. There are not many men who would even have listened to a woman, much less taken her words to heart. I recall God sent Samuel to Eli, the head priest. Eli did not repent, listen, or take heart to what Samuel told him. God in his mercy convicted David's heart. But what about revenge? Remember, when Saul had all the priests and people of Nob killed for showing kindness to David. I came to realize that if David had slaughtered Nabal's whole household, would he be any better than Saul? We came to David to escape from Saul and people like him, not become like him. David may have been thinking of the words that the Lord gave to Abigail when he wrote, quote, and the words of the Lord are flawless, like silver purified in a crucible, like gold refined 7 times. When Nabal heard that Abigail had saved him from 400 warriors, he became frozen within his body, but conscious, unable to speak, but able to see his life fading away. Nabal was given 10 days by the Lord to contemplate his Nabalah, his folly. When David heard of this, he praised God, but did not gloat over Nabal's death. Instead, he turned his thoughts to the wise and beautiful Abigail. He thought of how Abigail had addressed him as Adonai, which means the Lord, but is also used by a wife for her husband. David sent for Abigail, and they married. The end result was that David got everything that belonged to Nabal, his wife, his property, and also preserved his reputation. How awesome is that? The Lord's solution to a problem is always the best solution. If David had lost control, I don't know if I could continue to follow him. Who would want such a king? Would the people ever accept him as a righteous king if he had slaughtered innocent men, along with Nabal? After that, we went back to the district in the town of Ziph. They betrayed us to Saul before, but we were running out of places to hide. Those wicked Ziphites betrayed us again. But when Saul came, strangely, David did not run away. Like me, he was perhaps tired of running. He asked for a volunteer to sneak into Saul's camp with him at night. I was the first to raise my hand. That night, we crept up the mountain towards the camp. We found the sentries fast asleep. In fact, everyone was asleep. It was eerie, unnatural, suggesting the Lord's doing. It reminded me of the time that the Lord put Adam to sleep, and when he put Abraham to sleep to execute his covenant. I said to David, today, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of his own spear. But fortunately, David saw the situation as a test of his faith and as an opportunity to confront Saul. He told me, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? I lost my head in anger, just as David had done earlier with Nabal. I didn't take time to pause and think. I was selfish. I just wanted the running to be over. I was no wiser than the men who tried to get David to kill Saul in the cave at En-Gedi earlier. Instead, we took Saul's spear and water jug and went quietly to the far hill. And then David called and woke up Saul's camp. But he addressed his general, Abner, accusing him of failing to protect his king. And he asked Saul, what wrong am I guilty of? Did Saul want to force David to serve false gods? Saul confessed to acting like a fool, just like another Nabal. But David knew that Saul's heart had not changed. Only God can change hearts, and God had abandoned Saul. Saul had sinned first against God. In fact, isn't all sin first and foremost a sin against God? Are we not made in his image? And when we do not, and we sin when we do not bring him glory. Later, I realized that David had done for Saul what God, through Abigail, had done for David, preventing him from sinning. He showed mercy to Saul the way that God showed mercy to David, by speaking the truth with grace. David composed Psalm for us. He said, do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It only leads to evil. Turn from evil and do good. Then you will dwell in the land forever. After Saul left, a strange thing happened. David believed that Saul would never give up. He told us he had decided to seek refuge with the Philistines in Gath. But I thought, isn't that what you accused Saul of driving you to do, to serve false gods? But he insisted, and we must soon depart. Oy vey, what am I to do, brothers, but to follow him? Pray for us. Join me now in prayer. Dear Lord, Father in heaven, thank you for your mercy and grace. Help us to show grace and mercy to others. Help us to remember that you are always with us, ready to guide, if we seek you with our whole heart. Help us, Lord, to withhold our revenge against evil people, trusting that you will punish them. And be with us and comfort us in these difficult times. Brothers, shalom to you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And may your name be written in the book of life.